Extreme weather events across the country and around the world make it clear that we're facing a climate crisis and that we are all in it together. But what can we as individuals do to combat this? That's our topic today with an expert who will share with us existing solutions and technologies that can have a significant impact on climate change and what the average person can do to help reduce our carbon footprint. It's a climate change cover-up of sorts. So stay with us.
Welcome to Lean to the Left, home of no-holds-barred commentary, plus interviews with fascinating people. Some of them top experts, others simply with interesting stories to tell. You'll never know who'll show up at Lean to the Left. Now here's your host, Bob Gaddy.
Beth McDaniel is co-founder and president of the paint and coatings company Reactive Surfaces, where she also serves as legal counsel. Beth also is a partner in McDaniel and Associates, a law firm specializing in patent and trade secret law. As a serial entrepreneur, she's guided this bleeding-edge innovation company, operating in the paint and coatings and specialty chemicals industries for the past 15 years. She also served in leadership roles for numerous organizations, including as a Pathways to Peace Fellow, a premier social justice organization. Beth is also the co-founder of the leading X Prize team for carbon reduction. Their technology can remove massive amounts of carbon from the atmosphere and convert it into hydrogen, biochar, and other environmentally friendly solutions that have already begun to transform the carbon reduction and energy security space. Beth McDaniel, welcome to the Lean to the Left podcast.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for having me.
Hey, you know what? I'm really delighted because our audience is really concerned about climate change. Some of the best listened to and viewed episodes that we do prove that out, that people are concerned. And every time we have a weather event that can be attributed to climate change in some fashion or another, just emphasize that even more. What's your take on the climate crisis facing the world today, Beth?
My take is that it is a very urgent existential problem to humanity. Yeah. And aside from just mitigating or lowering emissions, which is what needs to be done for sure, what we also need to do is remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. We have to go a step further than just lowering emissions and actually remove some of this legacy CO2 from the atmosphere. And that's the kind of technology I'll talk to you about later. But yeah, we're facing a serious situation. The Paris Climate Accords and specified, and a lot of people will have heard this, that we don't want to exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels. Mm-hmm. We don't want to warm more than that. And when we do, because we probably are going to, then there are certain tipping points that could happen that would keep us from ever actually going back, okay? We might be in a situation that we can't turn back. For instance, at 1.5 degrees increase, the coral reefs start to die all over the world. At 2 degrees, we anticipate that the coral reefs will actually be gone. They'll be completely dead. So we're talking Great Barrier Reef, things like that, okay? And all the ecology that goes along with that. So for instance, it's just that alone is a big deal, not to mention just the melting of the ice caps and things like that are going to cause global sea levels to rise, which will cause flooding for coastal cities all around the world. No one really escapes this. We're talking about a change that could lead to a lot of food scarcity or water problems. All of those things lead on, unfortunately, to usually massive amounts of migration and civil unrest and all of these things that come along with, all of those hardships and extreme weather, of course.
Yeah. Do you have a sense that we're reaching a real dangerous situation, or is there still time to deal with this stuff?
There's still time and reason to deal with it. It's just that we all have to get very serious. And that really means the big industrial emitters need to come off of that. We have to look for alternative sources of energy. We have to lower emissions completely. And like I said, our technology is around carbon removal, and it's going to require carbon removal in order to achieve these goals, even if carbon emissions go way down. So yes, we can do it, but it's going to take a very concerted effort. And it's not a play-like thing. Unfortunately, it's great to drive, for instance, electric cars. But unfortunately, if we all drove electric cars on the earth, it still might not keep us back from it won't keep us back from the 1.5-degree barrier. And so we don't want to go there. And so anyway, it's going to take a lot more is all I'm saying, Bob. It's going to take a lot more than that. It's going to take a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, I talked to a guy a lot, a climate scientist who used to work in the fossil fuel industry, and he now is a huge advocate for renewable energy sources like offshore wind. And yeah, and he believes that the advent of electric cars is going to be of a huge benefit, but points out that those electric cars have to be powered by electricity, and that electricity has to be generated in some fashion, whether it's wind or solar or, the way we're doing it right now with fossil fuel. So
it helps. Every little bit helps, but it doesn't get us there.
Yeah.
We're going to have to do more dramatic changes, have more dramatic changes.
Yeah. Okay. He pointed out that you can have an electric car. That car has to be powered by electricity. So if you are also using solar power for your house, now you're getting somewhere. You got an electric car, you're using solar power, you're making a significant contribution. Is that true?
It gets better and better. We do that at our house. We have an a plug-in electric car, and we have solar power. Now the solar power is going to the grid. It's not going to power our own because we don't have a battery on site.
Sure.
And yeah, it gets a little complicated because once you start storing with batteries and you just start doing all the carbon accounting that goes on with that, then it might or it might not be helpful in the grand scheme of things, but probably. And alternative sources of energy. And you mentioned one, I'll make a small correction in something that you said pulling down carbon dioxide to make hydrogen fuel. That's not exactly what we would do, but with our system that I'll talk to you about later, there is a way that we can pull down CO2 and other atmospheric gases, nitrogen being one of them. Nitrogen in nature will provide ammonium in its process. And ammonia, I'm sorry, did I say ammonium? Ammonia, and which is a fuel in itself. And if you crack that, it becomes hydrogen fuel. And so there are systems and there are innovations that would lead to better alternative fuels as well. Okay.
Now, one thing that struck me when I looked at some of the material that you sent me, you're involved with this Embassy Row project, which is a philanthropic initiative that offers various services to organizations to promote environmental sustainability. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you're doing with that?
Yes, this is an NGO that we are collaborating with, and they do a lot of great things. The founder is a gentleman named James Scott, who was an advisor. He was an advisor in the energy sector to the United States government and has since set up this NGO. He did that for a long time. And then it came out of that, out of an administration, and set up an NGO to provide those kind of services, like a link between innovation that would be useful in the energy sector and in sustainability to not only the United States government, but also internationally. Especially he works in the Eastern European region. And what they look for, they're an NGO, they're not a profit center, but they look for, their goals are justice and equity and sustainability. And so they look for projects and initiatives and innovation that would service those goals. And in that case, that's what brought them to us when they learned that we're a paint company. We innovate in the paint and coatings sector of business. We're not a climate change business, but what he discovered, but we have a climate change technology that originated in the paint and coatings industry. And he got hold of that and thought it sounded like a really reasonable way to achieve some of these sustainability goals. So then he's taken us on in his accelerator to try to promote this technology. And that's what we're doing together.
Okay, great. Now, how about explaining to us what your company does and how that contributes to the fight against climate change?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so our company is called Reactive Surfaces. And what we've been doing, Bob, in the last couple decades is we've merged two scientific disciplines, which are biotechnology and materials science, which is the paint. Most people have never really thought twice about paints and coatings. I always say it's the biggest industry that no one's ever thought about. But if you look around you, everywhere around you, everything that you see around you has been coated at some point in its manufacturing process. Coatings are used to either decorate a surface with a color or to protect a surface. And so anything like of course, your walls are painted, but then also the floors and tables around you and your computer screen and your clothing and your jewelry and even your contact lenses, if you're wearing them, and all that, everything is coated at some point. So there's a whole bunch of surface area. What we've done in the coating business is we've added bio-based functionality as another component to a paint and coating. And what we want to do is we want those surfaces that can all be used with a coating to react to their environment in some way. That's a third prong. And we want it to be non-toxic. So we use naturally non-toxic ingredients. Usually we use things like enzymes and peptides. They're naturally occurring. They're all over you right now. We're used to living with them. They have some sort of functionality that we know of in nature. That's not our art. But our scientific art is to take that functionality and entrain that into a coating system and ask it to do that on a surface. And therefore, our surfaces become like canvases for functionality. So if we know, for instance, that there's a peptide, we use some peptide technologies, and there's a peptide, which is a string of proteins. And if we use this certain peptide group it is antimicrobial. And so if we put it into a paint, which we can do, and we've been doing this for quite some time, and it has a lot of antimicrobial qualities, meaning it can break down bacteria, fungi, algae, mold. And then we found out during the pandemic that and viruses too, when they land on a surface. And so that coating stays active. The peptide stays active with its functionality as long as it's in the coating. And so you have a long-term kind of solution to that. So that's what we do normally, is we work with these biomolecules. And then when we were struck in 2018 by the seriousness and the urgency of climate change, when one of the big reports came out with the International Panel on Climate Change, the UN's panel. And my husband, who is the chief innovator of our company, Dr. Steve McDaniel, he said after he laid on the couch for about a week, just dumbfounded when he realized how serious the situation we were in. And he said, he came out of it and he said, I've been thinking about something for a long time. I've been thinking about some paint innovation. And what it entails is not putting a biomolecule into paint, but putting an actual organism, and that being algae, single cell bacteria, into a coating system and trying to derive that functionality on the surface, which would be photosynthesis, because that's what algae do, is they photosynthesize. And taking you back to 8th grade biology, that means pulling down CO2 along with the help of sunlight and water, releasing oxygen and glucose. Mm-hmm. And so what we've done is devised a coating system that has that functionality. It's natural, it's non-toxic, and it pulls down CO2 either from the ambient air, or if you had like an industrial slipstream an emission slipstream coming out of an industrial facility, you could pipe that into our CO2 modules. And I can tell you a little bit about what those might look like, but we've devised a modular system to pull down as much CO2 as possible. And so we could actually take the CO2 from an industrial facility, pipe it in, and take care of that CO2 as well.
Now, is this paint that you're talking about the type of paint that I would put on in my house, on my walls in my house? Well, we'll find out the answer to that question as soon as we come back from this quick break.
Good question. And that's where everyone wants to go with it. And that is where we will go with it too. We are currently in development of such a paint. But what we've done, because of the situation being so, like I said, urgent, we feel like the most efficient use of this technology would be to pack in as much surface area as possible using paint, because that's what we can do with paint. Paint is lightweight. Paint adheres well to surface area. And so we can take paint and we can put it on a whole bunch of surface area, create an environment. Think of a module just like a box, okay? And create an environment within that box or module that simulates the best environment for algae to grow and multiply. And then it will work. It'll be doing more and more of that work. And that's what we've done. And then you just add a whole bunch of modules and we try to pull down as much CO2 as possible that way. The CO2 stays fixed in the paint until we decide to do something with it. And then we take that, harvest the whole algal biomass is what has grown up on that paint, separate the components of it, and we recycle all the paint components, we recycle all the water that we've used, and then we take all that algae that's grown up that contains that CO2, and that's where the biochar comes in. And we biochar that, which is a way of it's a way of heating something up without oxygen. And what it does is it reduces that algae into a charcoal briquette. That's what it looks like, which is what's called biochar. And then that's permanently sequestered in the biochar. It's a recognizable way of taking care of CO2 in the climate change world is biochar.
Okay, so we're not quite ready to roll this out for use in my home here in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, which is 6 years old and needs painted.
But we're getting there. We are developing that paint because we think that people do want to be a part of the solution.
Sure.
That individuals, and there is no real individual sequestration machine beyond planting trees, okay,
Right.
and things of that nature, natural solutions.
Sure.
And so this is something that could be implemented both as a paint on your house once we develop that. And like I said, we're getting on to that, but also we foresee using these modules. They could be stacked in a person's backyard to take care of their own carbon footprint.
Okay. All right. That's carbon capture coatings that we're talking about. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, did your company develop these things yourself? Was it your husband who came up with this or what?
It was his innovation, his idea.
Yeah.
But we operate as a paint and coatings innovation company on our day jobs. And so we have a lab full of a bunch of scientists, paint and polymer scientists. We have biologists, molecular biologists, biochemists, and like it's a real merger of those minds that comes together to create these paints.
I got it. So was your company started by you or your husband?
It was my husband's company.
It was your husband's company. So you married into the paint business, right?
I did. Strangely, though, actually, my parents had a paint company when I was growing up as well. My dad was a chemist.
Wow.
And on the side, they owned a paint company that
Okay.
put me through college, as a matter of fact.
Is that right? All right. You went out looking for some guy who was
In the paint business, I
in
guess.
the paint business. They say we marry our dad or our mom
Yeah, I
sometimes.
know.
That's interesting.
And then my dad and my husband were the best of friends because I always say my husband was a scientist that my dad never had.
Okay. So what's your role with the company then?
I'm president. So
Okay.
I'm in charge of things like business development, the admin side of things.
Uh-huh.
We operate our home office out of Austin, Texas. And that's where the admin side of things are. And I'm also a
Uh-huh.
lawyer. And so I handle a lot of the in-house kind of contractual things that we do, licensing, and because we usually license our innovation is how we get it out there.
Okay. All right. Now, you recently addressed the United Nations, World Bank, and European Embassy officials on new technology, on this technology that your company has developed.
Mhm.
Um, Talk a little bit about that experience and what was, where was it and how did it all come about?
Yeah. So this group that we were talking about, Embassy Row Project, they have these briefings,
Uh,
UN briefings, and this is done. And so they set us up. And this was done at the National Press Club in DC.
okay.
And yeah, we were presenting along with a number of other climate change technologies and embassy representatives, different diplomats from some of these Eastern European countries. And they, in fact, we got some real interest. We learned a lot, actually. What was it like? And we presented about our technology, which comes second nature because we talk about it all the time.
Mhm.
And we just told them how it works and where we are in the development process and how we see it implemented. But what we realized from the experience after talking to a lot of these embassy officials is that the EU especially is really looking to the United States to be a leader in this space. Everyone wants United States innovation, American innovation in this space. And so there's tons of opportunity and it's so urgent. We just need to get on top of it that I think the world will follow. And so it was very encouraging. It was very encouraging to hear some of these countries, for instance, Bulgaria and Romania, some of the drastic reductions that they've been involved in and their contribution, for instance, their country's contribution is far lower than ours. And they're taking a lot of drastic measures to combat climate change.
Mhm.
And so I don't know if we're taking as drastic a measures. Sometimes some of these EU countries also have carbon taxes, which is an incentive for companies to clean up their mess and that kind of thing. And hopefully, I think we'll follow behind on some of that regulatory because I think we need the government to really push this along.
In your work with this, I need to get clear in my mind, Beth, how is it that these coatings would be used like now? Are they at a point they can be implemented and taken advantage of now, or is there still work to do? And if so, how? I mean, in what application would they be used?
Yeah. Okay. So everything in innovation is always on a spectrum. And
Sure.
so the coding itself, and that's our business. That's when we're in
Right.
our lane, we're developing coatings. And the
Right.
coding is very well developed. For instance, if this was a typical coding development that someone had come to us and asked and paid for us to develop, because we're employed by a large paint manufacturer that wants a specific coating. And they
Right.
come to us and say, we want our coating to be functional in this way or that way. And so then we add our magic fairy dust and we get them a coating that has that. If that had happened, which we did this on our own, no one was paying us for it, but the coating would be ready to license. Okay.
Okay.
It's not to say that we wouldn't continue to improve on it because there's all sorts of things that we do in paints and coatings to make the system, that coating system, work better. But it works. Okay. And it works great. So when we
Okay.
talk about the paint is there. What I was mentioning before is that this best use would be in a modular system. So one great thing about paint is you can put it can cover a whole bunch of surface area. So a modular system would be like, if you can imagine a 1 meter cubed box, and we use things called intermediate bulk containers. You see these shipping ports and stuff like this. They're just a plastic 1 meter cube box that are stackable because they have metal around them that make them stackable. And so within that 1 meter cube, we paint a whole bunch of sheets and those are our surface area, and we might put 40 of those 1 meter squared sheets in 1 meter cube. So we get 40 meters squared of surface area in 1 meter cube.
Okay.
And so in doing so, we're getting the maximum density that we can. And then we take those boxes and we can either spread them out or we can stack them up, depending on whether or not we're using outside sources of energy. And so think of it as a facility. If it was up next to a steel mill, for instance, we'd probably use their waste heat to power the whole thing. There would be a pipe that would take their CO2 and would pipe it into our system. Okay. And there would be some sort of manifold system that would pipe that CO2 all the way through it. What's great about piping in CO2 is that algae love CO2. So the more CO2 we pipe into our system, the better our system works and the faster and more efficient. And so that's one way that you can imagine it, is just a whole bunch of these stacked boxes that have a whole bunch of painted surface area in them that are pulling down either ambient CO2 from the air or nestled up to an industrial facility and stacked up real high and pulling down their emission slipstream.
Oh, okay.
Does that explain it?
Yeah, I got that. Okay. So that's interesting. I'd like to talk a little bit about you. What'd you study in college?
I was a finance major.
Okay.
At University of Texas.
But you grew up in a family where your dad was in the paint business. And then you marry this guy who's a scientist in the paint business.
My dad was in the petrochemical business.
Oh, in the petrochemical.
Okay. He just had a paint store on the side. Yeah, but yeah. And then I married a chemist. Yeah.
All right. So he was in the petrochemical business. He had a paint store on the side. So he was an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Is that where you got the entrepreneur vibe going?
I think so. Yeah. I think he passed it on because I've never been that great at working for other people.
Yeah, I know what that's like. Okay. So did you get into any kind of business activity before you got married and got into this business?
Yeah. I fell into the land development business for about 8 years or so. Developing some lakefront property, which also I knew nothing about getting into, but I learned on the job. And that was the kind of law I was practicing for about 8 or 10 years. And then, just a variety of different kind of legal work that I've done.
Yeah. Okay. So basically your work has been as a lawyer working for companies, not that of a scientist.
No, I'm not the scientist. Yeah. I'm running the company.
Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at the lady that runs the show here. So beware. Okay. What else do we need to talk about? What can people do on their own to combat a climate crisis? Everybody wants to do something.
Yeah. So, we talked about every little bit helps. Yeah. I'm all about driving electric cars and that kind of thing. As an individual, it's a little bit harder because there's very little that an individual can do to make a difference. But here's what I've been telling people, because I've been asked that question before. Sure. And I have a strong belief in advocacy. I've taught it before. And what we really need to do is convince our lawmakers to take a really strong stand on things like lowering emissions and implementing carbon removal solutions. It's really easy to call your lawmaker or to send a letter to your lawmaker. And a lot of people don't realize that every time they make contact with their lawmaker, especially if it's a member of Congress, they are tallying that voice. And so if you call and you say, I want my member of Congress to implement more carbon removal technology, they tally that and say, okay, we have one person that feels that way. And that in my district, what that means is there's probably 1,000 people who feel that way. And so they use a multiplier, and they use that when they're making laws because they want to get reelected. So that's one thing to do, is speak up, because your life and the life of your kids and your grandkids are, hang in the balance.
What was your reaction when our previous president pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord?
Who was he? I can't remember his name.
You can't remember his name?
No. My reaction was, yeah, I figured he would do something like that. I thought it was a terrible move. There's the Paris Climate Accords, that's just a minimum that we need to meet. And the fight against truth and the facts and wokeism and all that stuff that they just want to lump climate change into is just we're going to look back on this, or in history, as like the dark ages if we don't do something. The fact is we're the adults in the room, and this is happening on our clock, and we better get busy, really busy about this. And so despite all the people who would rather who don't care because they're old and they don't really care and they just want to hang on to all their money. Sorry, you shouldn't have got me on that soapbox, but
why? I wanted you on that soapbox. What I'd
you
like
got a couple more hours.
We can talk about that all you want to, because my feeling obviously is that the Trump administration and its supporters have set this country way back, not only in this area, but in other areas. But this is an area that it's just dangerous for the entire world. And to try to deny that human beings are responsible for the condition of our environment and our climate crisis today is just totally irresponsible, in my opinion.
It's irresponsible, and it's not serving us, and everyone is at risk. Everyone.
I still talk to people living where I live. It's a very red area, and I talk to people all the time who poo the climate crisis. If it gets cold on what should be a warm day, they go, "Oh, where's global warming at?"
Yeah, it's cold.
Bullshit. Yeah, it's cold. Yeah, come on.
That's just ignorance, or whether it's deliberate or not. There are almost no legitimate scientists that disagree with man-made climate change. It's just something that we have to do. Now, I'm not an advocate for reducing emissions to zero in industries that can't. Okay, that's where carbon removal comes in. There are certain industries, the airline industry, they can't go alternative that we know of. So there are certain industries which are going to be emitters, and we just we've got to clean up our mess. Okay. Pulling fossil fuels out of everything immediately would cause a big mess too. So we have to just, get there gradually, but also take real dynamic steps to make sure that we're not going to go past a point of no return.
Yeah, we've got members of Congress who are still beholden to the coal industry. Joe Manchin in West Virginia is an example of that. And that is just going to continue to be a problem until it gets all worked out. I'm told by experts, people who work in coal mines have the skill to work in other areas of energy development, so they can be retrained. That may be true, but if you're talking about some person who's been a coal miner for 20, 25 years, that's been his or her total existence. You're asking them to step away from that and go work on a wind farm somewhere? I don't think so. Really?
But yeah, I don't have the answer to all those questions, but that's the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah.
It's almost like saying we should keep up the cigarette industry because what about all those people that worked in the cigarette industry, and now people aren't smoking as much, and what are they supposed to do?
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good point.
Sometimes we just gotta move on to something else.
Yeah. It will take a little bit of time, certainly it will, but it's clear that this country has got to move away from fossil fuel, and that means the coal industry. But politically, that is a real big problem right now, for sure. Yeah,
we should make it for these workers.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of inequities. It's not fair that the people in Africa are suffering just as much from climate change, and they emit 1/10 of or something of what we are emitting over here. There's all sorts of inequities.
And then you have China, which is the world's biggest producer of harmful emissions. Isn't that true?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to talk about?
I hope your listeners enjoyed it, and if they want to hear more or find out more about carbon capture coatings, then they can go to our website, reactivesurfaces.com, like the surface of a table, and look at our technologies there, and just know that there are some solutions out there.
It's a fascinating thing to think that paint could actually contribute to the fight against climate change. I would have never, ever dreamed, never thought of that. So thankfully, thankfully, there are people like your husband and you and the people that work for you that
he thinks like a little biomolecule, but really he does. Those are like his little pets. But anyway, this technology, actually, this paint is fashioned after lichen. It's a biomimicry, actually. I thought maybe y'all would enjoy knowing this, that lichen, like you see on rocks or all around when you go hiking, if you try to scratch it off, it doesn't really come off. So that was the inspiration. Actually, my husband saw some lichen in it was up in the Arctic when he was doing some scientific research, and he saw this bright red lichen on a rock. He thought it was paint. When he saw it, he tried to scrape it off, and he was like, "That's not paint, that's lichen." And that was the inspiration for it. So we learned a lot about lichen, and lichen is composed of both fungus and algae. The algae photosynthesize within the lichen, and the fungus creates an environment for the algae to do, like allowing gas exchange and allowing just the right amount of humidity to be absorbed, and allowing sunlight but keeping out UV. And that's what the paint does. The paint is like the fungus, allowing the algae to do what it does. And so we just copied. We're copycats.
That's pretty amazing. So lichen, that's LICHEN, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, listen, Beth, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Yeah, all right.
Thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate it.
Now, one more break, and I'll be right back with some closing comments. Hey guys, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed this podcast and that you'll come back on a regular basis and check out our interviews with guests on topics that I hope you find interesting, entertaining, and enlightening. Let your friends know about this podcast and take a minute to subscribe. Just go to podcast.leantotheleft.net to subscribe, check out the upcoming interview schedule, and listen to all of our episodes. And follow us on social media. Facebook at the Lean to the Left Podcast, Twitter at Lean to the Left 1, Instagram at BobGaddy_Lean to the Left, and TikTok at Lean to the Left. And you can watch the episodes at YouTube at Lean to the Left. And don't forget to visit our blog site, leantotheleft.net, where you'll find commentary on the news by some excellent writers with progressive perspectives on a whole range of topics. You can sign up as a member there, and of course, it's all free. Now, this is Bob Gaddy signing off for Lean to the Left. Thanks for sharing your time with us.